Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 134. I'm Enignius and today we are continuing with the Heracles build. Been very busy despite recent events. We haven't had any more attacks since the last one, and now the sun is coming up. It's a perfect time to kind of give you an overview of what I've been doing since the last build episode. This is the front of the ship, looking all the way towards the back. It's actually the thought that I had in my mind when I made this great big glass tube was that it's going to look really, really ridiculous if the only interior section of the ship uses like a third of it, and then the rest of it is just this big tube. People are like, why the hell did you make it so big? You're not using any of it. And then it got used. So, I mentioned in the last build episode that I didn't want to make any more videos focusing on time lapses of building the different modular rooms on the ship, because once you've seen one go together, you've pretty much seen them all. And we're going to stick with that, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys a brief tour of what I've done, because this is the best time to be looking at it if you want to kind of understand the layout. By the time the rest of the hull is done, this will all be covered up. You won't be able to see it so easily anymore. So what we've got, this is the glass tube, the original glass tube, running all the way down there. Up here is the botanical module. This is where all of our farming will take place, and this is really designed at this point now for multiplayer accessibility. If your server admin will allow you to build this ship from the blueprint, when the blueprint is available, there will be enough room here to grow enough food to keep several players going for, well, basically indefinitely, as long as you look after the place. The whole idea with building something of this size was not only to have lots and lots of room to build things, but also, and perhaps more importantly, a little bit of protection so that if you take a little bit of damage to one side and it depressurizes, the other side, on the other side of the ship, will still be able to grow things. You won't lose all of the sprouts and all of the other things. It won't be such a catastrophic loss to have some damage to the interior of the botanical area, losing some glass panels that causes it to depressurize. It's kind of important in terms of the longevity of the thing. We're actually going to take a quick look on the inside of these individual new sections as well, but for now we're just going to kind of focus on what's going on from the outside. There's the original cockpit room. The cockpit is still in there. This is the utility room where we've got the constructors and the first aid and the fridges and all that other stuff. Here is the ammunition storage room that we had done, and this is the first of the fuel storage rooms. You can barely see the blue in there as a result of the fact that we've actually got fuel in this thing now. You can see the fuel tanks, and that is basically the sum total of everything that we have added since the last episode. This may have been added actually since the last episode as well, but it's basically identical to this, slightly different dimensions and fuel tanks instead of ammunition containers, understanding that these are highly explosive rooms. If you're taking damage to these areas and you're taking damage specifically to the blocks inside them, things can start exploding. So a little bit of duplication and a little bit of compartmentalization is certainly warranted in this sort of a situation. This spot here that looks kind of like a lifeboat dangling from the underside of the tube is the oxygen tank room, where we have many oxygen tanks. And the reason why it's built out of combat steel on the lower section is because I wasn't sure if I wanted to raise the ship up any further, which would allow me to build you know, a more robust hull around this section. So whether we raise the ship up a little bit further or not, we've got a reasonable amount of protection on the underside of the ship where we have our oxygen stored. I don't know if oxygen tanks explode the way fuel tanks and ammo tanks can. Assuming that they do, we've still got a measure of protection inside, and we'll see that when we go look at the interiors. And as you may have already noticed, in addition to this great big room here for fuel tanks, I added some more. And these store a lot of fuel tanks as well. And you can see they kind of step up there. So we've actually got 4 different floors inside this thing that hold fuel tanks, all happily waiting to be filled so that we have enough to keep us going for a while if we do happen to find ourselves on a planet and we're looking around for a place to land, or whatever reasons you might have for not wanting to have to worry about refueling the ship. Lots and lots and lots of fuel storage, segregated, compartmentalized. If this whole thing here winds up getting chewed up and exploding, you've still got 2 more completely isolated segments that are full of fuel tanks to help keep you going. And then the last thing that I added just before I started recording is the cluster of generators. There's a total of 8 generators attached to this thing. I wonder if the drone will let me get high enough to get a better view of what's going on here. Pretty close. As you can see, we've got 8 generators, which relative to the Saturnus, which has 4, I think 8 will be enough. If it's not, if we find that when we're, for example, trying to lift off in gravity and we're getting the message saying that we're drawing more power than we're able to provide, it won't take much to modify this and add more generators. But I think to start, this is a pretty good number. And I decided to show you this now because once I cover it with glass, even if we do an interior view where we run inside and kind of look around, it's really difficult to kind of get a view of what's going on. So this will also be surrounded in glass and, armored glass. Very significant difference. And then we will start working on the hull. So let's go inside. So here we are inside the botanical part of the ship. Now, one of the things that I do have to do, and I keep reminding myself and I keep forgetting, it's this weird cycle, it's horrible, is I have to go around and make sure that the glass is all polarized properly relative to completely subjective criteria that I decide. You get the idea. You can have the glass any way you want, but I have an idea of how I would like it to be, and I want to go around and make sure that it's done that way. You'll see this is a very large area of the ship by design, and additionally you'll see, as I was mentioning, it's 2 halves really. You've got this central section, basically a great big greenhouse hallway that will be pressurized, and then you've got it branching off into 2 different sides, and each side is a mirror of the other, and it will also be pressurized. If you really wanted to go crazy, if you really wanted to secure the longevity of your food source through potential conflict, you could even compartmentalize this into like 3 or 4 different sections lengthwise. So you cut it in half, sort of like there, and then you could cut it in half there and over here, so that one area takes damage, depressurizes, all the plants die, no big deal, you've still got plenty of plants remaining. It's an option that's available. It might take a little time for the retrofit to make everything go together the way you might want it to go, but it wouldn't be especially difficult. It'd just be a little bit time consuming. I've got these truss blocks running the length of each side. There's 2 of them. There's one here that just happens to be in the middle of this 3-block wide section. And then over here, we've got this one that's in the middle of this 3-block wide section, including that row down there. When we put the grow lights on here, we'll have a fully functional indoor farm that's very, very large. Like I said, you won't be worried about food if you've got something like this. You won't be worried about rotten food either. If you ever need rotten food, you could just do a harvest and put them in a container and let them rot, and you'll be good for life. It's just one of those things. This is a little bit larger than a single player could ever really need. That having been said, you've seen it from the outside, you've seen it on the inside. At some point, you may see it with plants growing in it. I haven't really sat down and kind of decided if that's something that I want to do or not. There's the cockpit room down there. You can go down here. There's currently no reason to do so. But just the way things work out with the orientation of the glass panes, sometimes you can't always put rails the way you might like to. So I don't have rails in some of these rooms just because they don't really fit especially well. Now we're going to move towards the back, and we're just going to peek into some of the more oddly shaped rooms that we've made through the cockpit area. Someone suggested putting teleporters inside the ship so that you could go from one place to the next, which I thought was a really cool idea until I looked at the teleporters and it says that you can't include them in a blueprint. which sucks, for lack of a better word, because that kind of defeats the thought of having them added. Because to have a teleporter on the far side there, and the far side there down towards the generators, and maybe one in the cockpit area, and have them linked so that you could use those to move around through the ship would be pretty outstanding, I think. So here's the ammo room. Now that I've got my bearings, oh, gotta keep going down. Pass through here. Again, this is another one of the hallways that will be pressurized, because we go down through here, and this is where all of our oxygen tanks are. And you can see we have a lot of oxygen tanks in the oxygen tank room. As is the case with the farm area, the idea is that we want to have a little bit of segregation so that if things start getting destroyed, we've got enough of them that we're going to have at least some left over when the thing is all said and done. If you really wanted to add more protection, you could do combat steel through this little trough here in between. And I think, yeah, the platforms are oriented in such a way that you couldn't actually make a wall, a 2-block high wall starting down there and going up like that, just because of the orientation of the platforms. But you could, bottom line, provide a little bit of extra protection and make it a little bit less likely that there would be damage spreading across both halves. One way that you could make the wall happen so that they were fully segregated from one another with that wall would be to replace these platforms here with cubes, like this center row of platforms. This is that little pillar of 2 blocks that we were just looking at, and if you were to extend that all the way down, of course that would give you your wall and provide much better segregation between the two. The idea behind having so many oxygen tanks is because, again, we've got a very large ship, and we've got sections of the ship that are pressurized that are very large. And if you lose the oxygen from those sections of the ship, you have to have oxygen available to repressurize it once you've done the repairs. It's easier to have that oxygen already in the tanks, I would think, than to have to go and grab them from storage somewhere and then reload the tanks, etc., etc. So it's a redundancy that's not entirely necessary, but I mean, go big or go home, right? What more can I say? We keep moving back here through another small section, and this is mostly to keep again, things compartmentalized. So if you lose structural integrity in one area, it's not the end of the world. And you can see, splitting off this way, we've got one of these multi-tiered rooms, and again, probably easiest to see how this all comes together if we use the drone. It's we've got a lot of fuel tanks in here, and we've got a little catwalk along the front of each of them that has rails. Go figure. Conveniently, so if you wanted to stand in the fuel tank room and gaze out at the walls, the interior walls of the hull, you can do that. But it just, to me, it made sense with the way everything was coming together here to have just like a walkway along the front of each of these rows, and then I put rails on it because that also made sense. And then here, and then lastly, we've got sort of this half level that adds even more, and it's a mirror image on the other side. We won't go over there and look, just because, like I said, you've seen one, you've seen the other. I kind of like the way these turned out, in the sense it's a very odd shape, and it gave me an opportunity to practice messing around with different glass shapes. This and the oxygen room down below gave me a chance to just kind of mess around. It took a while, just because I was doing so much messing around, getting a feel for the different shapes that are available, and getting them set up the way that I like them. Sometimes the combinations that I came up with really didn't appeal. So that brings us to the end of the tour of the things that we've done since the last episode. Basically, the internals of the ship are 99% complete. We still have to add the ventilators so that all of these things are actually pressurized. We have to add lights in the interior, which is actually turning out to be a little bit trickier than it has to be, and it's just because, again, the way the glass panels are oriented, I think maybe, just to kind of give you an idea what I'm talking about when I say how the glass panels are oriented, you can see we've got this panel here. It's a 1x2, and it's vertical. Once you've placed it, you've got this panel, you can attach things to this side of it, right? And they'll sit flush, because this guy here is occupying this block space, and we can see that if we try and do another here. See, it skips right over. It won't let us try and place anything in the same spot because this block space is already occupied by this little narrow piece of glass. So when it comes to adding things like lights, if we wanted to, we could add lights. I think, yeah, I've got some lights here just to kind of give you an idea. We can completely ignore any rules of things that make sense versus things that do not. And it won't even actually let me place this light. Sometimes you can cheat a little bit and you'll actually be able to place something. It'll attach to the side of the block space that doesn't actually have anything on it. So you have the light floating in the middle of nowhere. Doesn't really make sense. But essentially, when you're looking at a hallway and you're going down that hallway and it's all made out of glass and you have all of these glass panes, it looks like you've got plenty of room. You can just stick a light on one of the glass panes, when in reality, because it's on the outer edge of the block space, you can't. So that's sort of the issue that we have with this section on the interior of the ship, is we can't actually place anything on the walls because of the way that the glass is on the outside of the block space, and then all of this space here that looks like is available actually isn't because of that. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. What I may end up doing is just putting little flares on the platform like this. Like, these are wee little tiny lights. They're not very big at all. And use those as the lighting for the hallways, because everything else that we try and place, here's an example. Here's the flare, and it's floating in midair because we've actually attached it to the side of this block space here where this glass pane is that doesn't actually have anything there. The game knows that there's a cube here. The game is showing us that it's only occupied by this spot that we can see. Now that I'm looking at it, that's kind of cool to have lights that are set up like that, that are kind of floating, suspended in the air. I mean, it is sci-fi. Who are we to say no, that's not okay? But you get the idea how I might not necessarily want to do it that way. Looking at it now, we may end up doing it that way. You never know, but you get the idea. Anyways, that's the interiors. Like I say, 95% done. We need pressurization, ventilation, and lights to finish them off, and a few other details as we go. But realistically speaking, most of the build from this point forward is going to be focusing on the outer hull and the hangar bays. So we're going to actually get started on that for a little bit. We'll spend a little bit of time building some of the outer hull right now. And this won't be an especially long build segment. It's just a couple of minutes to take a look at sort of the beginnings of what we're going to be working on the side of the ship that's not going to have the hangars. This will be kind of the testing grounds in terms of the design for the hull that we will be using on the other side, but again, focusing on deliberately making things asymmetrical across that center line so that we keep things looking interesting, we keep everything looking deliberate, even though the right side won't match what's going on the left. Now, we've gone to all this trouble to build the interior, and it's all encased in glass. We've discussed the whole idea of the compartmentalization for maintaining pressurization if you're starting to take damage. But in addition to that, we've sort of defined to some extent the shape of the outer hull as well, because we've got different sections of the ship that are fairly significantly different from one another in terms of the profile, their outer profile. And when we try and build a hull around them to match that profile, we're going to end up with different sections of the ship looking a little bit different. That's not a bad thing. That's kind of the whole idea here. But one of the things that I've decided that I want to try with this build is to work with the idea of bulkheads, which is what we've started messing around with here. We've got a couple of thrusters in place. It was important to get those in place, the lift thrusters. And now we're kind of working with the same idea as before, creating profiles that sort of define the shape and then we fill them in. But in this case, we're actually going to be building them as bulkheads, and then when we fill them in, the areas in between the bulkheads will be a little bit thinner, a little bit weaker, but having those bulkheads there will have the potential to improve the survivability of the ship in all kinds of various different nasty encounters with people or AI who want to do harm to the ship, because those bulkheads will have the possibility of blocking shots that are kind of passing through on an angle, whereas the thinner sections in between will just sort of be 1 or 2 blocks of protection, and then once you're through them kind of thing. So you'll be seeing more of this in the next episode. We're going to carry on, and like I said, we're going to be focusing on the right half of the ship, or the starboard half, depending on how you want to look at it, and then we'll be going from there. And then once we've got that mostly roughed in, then we'll start working on the other side, and then once both sides are done, then we'll come back, we'll start doing the detailing passes, etc., until the whole thing is done. So if you want to be notified about the next and future videos in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel and or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.